The trade station Orionis 7 floated in the cold silence between two empires. It was a massive ring of metal and glass, home to thousands of alien species who came to trade, to talk, and to pretend that the galaxy was a peaceful place. On this day, a small group of human diplomats walked through its polished halls, smiling politely at creatures 10 times their size, unaware that their fate had already been decided in a room they were never invited to. Deep inside the station, behind doors that no ordinary visitor could open, the Galactic Council held a secret meeting. Grand Arbiter Volnus sat at the head of a long black table, his insectoid body towering over the others. He had ruled the Council for over 300 years. He had crushed rebellions, silenced entire species, and bent the galaxy to his will. But today, for the first time in a very long time, he was worried. 40 systems, Volnus said, his voice clicking like stones grinding together. In less than 80 years, humans have taken 40 systems. They copied our faster-than-light engines in a single generation. They are building warships, not trade ships, warships. Warlord Dragon, a massive reptilian creature covered in dark green scales, leaned forward. His yellow eyes burned with contempt. "They are insects," he growled. "One world, one species. They have no claws, no armor, no venom. I could crush 100 of them with one hand." "And yet they keep spreading," Volnus replied. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Volnus laid his plan on the table. He called it Resolution 7 Omega. It was simple and brutal. The Council would send a strike fleet to destroy 3 human frontier colonies, not military targets, civilian worlds. The message would be clear: know your place or be erased. Only one voice in that room spoke against it. Emissary Talith stood at the far end of the table. She was tall and thin, with silver skin that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Her species was known for their wisdom and their caution, and right now, every part of her was screaming that this was a mistake. "You do not understand what humans are," Talith said, her voice steady but urgent. "I have studied them. Their history is not like ours. They did not grow in peace. They grew in war. They spent thousands of years fighting each other. They built weapons that could destroy their own world, and they used them. They survived ice ages, plagues, and famines that would have ended any other species, and every single time they were pushed to the edge of extinction, they came back stronger." Dragon laughed. It was a deep, ugly sound. "You are afraid of a species that still eats cooked meat and sleeps for 8 hours a day," Talith said quietly. "I am afraid," Talith said quietly, "of a species that learned to split the atom before it learned to leave its own planet." Volnus raised one of his long, segmented arms, and the room fell silent. "The vote is called," he said. "All in favor of Resolution 7 Omega." Every hand, claw, and tentacle in the room went up, every one except Talith's. "The resolution passes," Volnus said. "Admiral Serac, you have your orders." 3 weeks later, the strike fleet arrived at the human frontier. The first colony to fall was called New Busan. It was a mining world, home to nearly 1 million people. They had no warships, only cargo haulers and a few old patrol boats. Admiral Serac's fleet appeared in orbit, without warning, and began firing. The orbital bombardment lasted 40 minutes. When it was over, there was nothing left but glass and ash. The second colony fell the same way, a manufacturing hub, 800,000 people, gone in an hour. The third colony was different. It was called New Gyeongju, and it was a farming world. Green fields stretched across entire continents. Families lived in small towns, connected by dirt roads. Children went to school in buildings made of wood and stone. It was the quietest, most peaceful place humanity had ever built among the stars. When Serac's ships appeared in the sky above New Gyeongju, a school teacher named Park Yuna, was standing in front of her class of 32 children. She saw the flash of light through the window and knew immediately what it was. She had read about orbital bombardments in history class. She never thought she would see one. Yuna pulled her students under their desks and held as many of them as she could. She activated the colony's emergency beacon with shaking hands. Into the recorder, she said only this. "This is New Gyeongju. We are under attack. There are children here. Please, someone help us." The transmission reached the deep space frigate Baeko, 2 systems away. Captain Han Do-hyun was sitting in his command chair when the signal came through. The bridge crew heard the message play through the speakers. They heard the fear in the teacher's voice. They heard the rumble of explosions behind her words. And then the signal cut to static. No one on the bridge moved. Communications officer No Eun-ji pulled the casualty estimates from the 3 colonies and read them aloud. Her voice did not shake, but her hands did. Combined civilian casualties across all 3 colonies, 2,300,000. No military targets were present at any site. These were residential zones, schools, hospitals, and farmland. The bridge was completely silent. First Officer Yoon So-mi stood beside Do-hyun's chair. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were burning. She looked at her captain and waited. Do-hyun did not shout. He did not slam his fist on the console. He did not cry. He sat perfectly still, staring at the screen where the static from New Gyeongju still flickered. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and low, and that calmness was more terrifying than any scream. "Send word to Earth. All channels. Open priority. Tell them what happened." He paused. "Then tell them we are going to get every single one of them back." So-mi nodded once and turned to relay the order. 2 systems away, on Orionus 7, Grand Arbiter Volnus received confirmation that all 3 strikes were successful. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long, satisfied breath. The other council members congratulated each other. Dragon was already talking about which human systems to claim next. In the corner of the room, Emissary Talith stood alone. She stared at the celebration around her with a look of absolute dread. She had read the files. She knew what humanity did when it was wounded. She knew what was coming. She whispered to herself, so quietly that no one heard. "You fools, you just woke them up." And somewhere in the dark between the stars, the Baeko turned toward home, and the silence of human space began. The galaxy waited for humanity to cry. Every species that had ever been struck by the Council had done the same thing. They wept. They begged. They sent diplomats with shaking hands and desperate offers. They gave up territory, resources, and pride, just to make the pain stop. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked for 10,000 years. But the humans did something no one expected. They went quiet. Within 48 hours of the attacks, every human embassy in Council space was emptied. Diplomats packed their bags and left without a single word. Human trade ships pulled out of every port, every station, every market. Communication channels that had been open for decades went dark overnight. The border between human space and the rest of the galaxy became a wall of silence so thick it felt like standing at the edge of a black hole. Nothing came out. No messages. No threats. No demands. Nothing. On the Council homeworld of Valtheris Prime, Warlord Dregan found the silence amusing. He stood in the war room with his arms crossed and his sharp teeth showing in what passed for a smile among his kind. "They are hiding," he told the gathered officers. "Like prey animals. They crawled into their holes and pulled the dirt over their heads. Give them a few weeks. They will come back with their hands open, begging for peace." Admiral Serok, who had commanded the strike fleet, was less certain. He had seen something during the attack on New Gyeongju that bothered him. One of the old patrol boats, a ship so small it barely had weapons, had charged directly at his flagship. It had no chance of doing any real damage. But the pilot flew straight into the defensive fire without turning, without slowing, without even trying to survive. The little ship burned apart in seconds, but the pilot never changed course. Serac had fought many species. None of them had ever done that. He kept this thought to himself. Emissary Talith did not keep her thoughts to herself. She went to Volnus directly, requesting an emergency audience. She brought a datapad filled with files she had spent weeks compiling from every intelligence source she could find. "You need to read this," she said, placing the datapad on his desk. Volnus barely looked at it. "The war is over, Talith. There was no war. It was a correction." "Read it," she said again, and something in her voice made the old arbiter pause. He picked up the datapad and began to scroll. What he read was the military history of Earth, not the sanitized version that the Council's cultural analysts had filed away. The real version. He read about a conflict called World War II, where humans killed 60 million of their own kind in 6 years. He read about nuclear weapons, bombs that could erase cities in a single flash, and how humans built tens of thousands of them and pointed them at each other for half a century. He read about something called the Siege of Stalingrad, where humans fought over a single city for 5 months in freezing cold, eating rats and leather boots, refusing to surrender, even when there was nothing left to fight for. He read about Normandy, where thousands of young soldiers ran directly into gunfire on an open beach, because the ones behind them would finish what they started. He read about a place called Korea, where a country split in two fought a war so brutal that every major city was reduced to rubble, and the people rebuilt everything from nothing in a single generation, then became one of the most advanced civilizations on their planet. Volnus put the datapad down. His compound eyes were very still. "This is one species," Talith said, "from one small planet. And they did all of this to each other. Now imagine what they will do to us." Volnus said nothing. Talith turned and left. Inside human space, the silence hid something terrifying. Earth's United Defense Command activated Protocol Jindo, the highest level of military mobilization in human history. Every shipyard, every factory, every forge on every human world switched to wartime production. Cargo freighters were stripped down and rebuilt as gunships. Mining vessels were fitted with armor plating and missile racks. Civilian engineers who had spent their lives building bridges and buildings were now designing weapons platforms. Retired soldiers, some of them old enough to need walking sticks, showed up at recruitment centers and demanded to be put back in uniform. The entire species moved as one. There were no debates, no protests, no votes. 2.3 million civilians were dead. Children were dead. That was all anyone needed to know. Aboard the Baekho, the crew worked without rest. Chief Engineer Kang Ji-hyuk had not slept in 4 days. He was deep inside the ship's weapons bay, surrounded by stripped-down Council plasma batteries and human railgun components. He was building something new, something that had never existed before. A hybrid weapon that combined the raw kinetic force of a human railgun with the energy cycling of Council plasma technology. The result was a cannon that could punch through Council shields like they were made of paper. His hands were burned and bleeding from the work. He did not stop. No-NG sat in the communications room, headphones pressed against her ears, listening to Council transmissions. She had cracked their primary encryption within a week. Now she was inside their entire military network, reading their orders, tracking their fleet movements, and mapping every defense installation in Council space. She fed every piece of information back to Earth's command center in a continuous stream. The Council had no idea. First Officer Yoon Somi spent her nights in the tactical planning room. She had not smiled since New Gyeongju. Her face was calm, but her eyes were empty of everything except focus. She was building a battle plan, and she had given it a name: Operation Dangun. It was not a plan for defense. It was not a plan for negotiation. It was a plan for the complete destruction of the Council's ability to wage war, executed in a single coordinated strike across multiple systems simultaneously. It was the most ambitious military operation any human had ever designed. She presented it to Do-Yun on the bridge at midnight. He read it in silence, page by page. When he finished, he looked at her and nodded once. "How long until we are ready?" he asked. 3 months, Somi replied. "Make it 2. On Valtheris Prime, weeks turned into months, and still there was nothing from human space. Dragon grew bored waiting. Volnus began to relax. The other council members went back to their normal business, already forgetting the colonies they had burned. Only Talith remained awake at night. She sat alone in her quarters, staring at the dark border on her star map, where human space began. She had finished reading their history, all of it. Every war, every uprising, every revolution, every last stand. She understood now what no one else on the council could see. Humans did not respond to pain with surrender. They did not respond to loss with acceptance. When you hurt a human, something changed inside them. Something old and deep and terrible woke up. Every defeat they had ever suffered had only made them more dangerous. Every wound had only made them angrier. The silence from human space was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of a blade being sharpened. Talith closed her eyes and said it aloud to the empty room, as if saying it might somehow change what was coming. They do not respond to pain with submission. They respond with annihilation. The stars outside her window burned on, cold and indifferent, and somewhere beyond them, behind a wall of perfect silence, 400 million humans prepared for war. The silence lasted 91 days. And then, in the span of a single hour, it ended everywhere at once. Admiral Sarek was the first council officer to understand what was happening. He was stationed at Citadel Voron, the council's largest forward naval base. A massive fortress of steel and energy shields floating in orbit above a gas giant. It was considered unbreakable. 300 warships were docked around it, and its defense grid could track and destroy 1,000 incoming missiles at once. Sarek was reviewing supply reports when the first alarm went off, then the second, then the third. Then every alarm on the station screamed at the same time. His tactical officer's voice came through the speakers, and for the first time, Sarek heard genuine panic in it. "Contact. Multiple contacts. They are everywhere, Admiral. 7 systems reporting simultaneous human fleet arrivals." This is not a raid. This is an invasion. Operation Dangun had begun. Yoon Somi had designed the assault like a fist with 7 fingers, each one striking a different critical point in the Council's military network at the exact same moment. Shipyards, supply depots, communication relays, forward bases. Every target had been chosen to do maximum damage to the Council's ability to fight, move, and talk. If the plan worked, the Council would lose its military infrastructure in a single day. Captain Han Do-hyun led the spearhead fleet directly at Citadel Voron. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel like a swarm of angry hornets, 600 warships appearing in the space around the fortress in a flash of light and displaced energy. Sarek had less than 2 minutes to organize his defense. He sent every ship to meet the incoming humans in a standard defensive formation, the same formation the Council had used for 1,000 years. Long-range energy weapons fired first, creating a wall of plasma between the two fleets. The humans flew straight through it. Sarek stared at his tactical display in disbelief. Council doctrine said that any sane fleet would stop at long range and exchange fire carefully, probing for weaknesses. That was how civilized species fought wars. But the humans did not stop. They accelerated. They pushed their ships forward at full speed, closing the distance so fast that the Council's targeting systems could barely keep up. At close range, everything changed. Council ships were designed to fight energy battles at a distance. Their shields were tuned to deflect plasma and laser fire. They had no answer for what came next. Kang Ji-Huk's hybrid railguns opened fire for the first time in real combat, and the results were catastrophic. Magnetically accelerated tungsten slugs, each one the size of a grown man's arm, hit Council shields at a fraction of the speed of light. The shields, built to absorb energy, shattered like glass against the raw kinetic force. Hull plating that had never been breached was torn open in seconds. Council ships began to die. Yoon So-mi commanded the battle from the Bay Coast Tactical Station with cold, mechanical precision. She had studied every engagement the Council had ever fought, and found the same weakness in all of them. The Council fought wars the way they ran their empire, slow, predictable, and based entirely on the assumption that their enemy would follow the same rules. Humans had no such assumption. So-mi threw fighters in close to blind the enemy sensors with electronic jamming. She sent fast attack ships in groups of 3 to isolate and overwhelm larger targets. She coordinated boarding teams to strike crippled vessels while the battle still raged around them. It was chaos, and humans thrived in chaos. Bae Sunwoo and his Marines launched from the Baekho in armored assault shuttles, cutting through the crossfire towards Sarak's flagship, a massive dreadnought called the Sovereign Blade. Plasma bolts streaked past their shuttle as Sunwoo gripped the overhead rail and looked at his squad. They were young. Some of them were scared. All of them had lost someone in the colony attacks. "Remember New Gyeongju," Sunwoo said. That was all he needed to say. The shuttle slammed into the dreadnought's hull, and the Marines breached through with cutting charges. Inside the ship, the fighting was close and brutal. Council soldiers were bigger, stronger, and had better armor. Human Marines fought like cornered animals, moving through corridors in tight formations, covering each other, never stopping, never retreating. Sunwoo took a plasma burn to his left shoulder that melted through his armor and scorched the skin beneath. He grunted, switched his rifle to his right hand, and kept moving. They reached the bridge in 11 minutes. Sarak was standing at the command console when the door exploded inward. He turned and saw 5 humans step through the smoke, covered in blood and burn marks, weapons raised. The alien admiral was twice Sunwoo's size. He had fought in 6 wars and commanded fleets that darkened the skies of entire planets. But in that moment, looking into the eyes of the bleeding human standing in front of him, Sarak felt something he had never felt before. Fear. Sunwoo grabbed Sarak by the front of his uniform and slammed him against the console hard enough to crack the screen. He leaned in close, his voice a low growl through his cracked helmet visor. "You killed our families. Did you think we would file a complaint?" Sarak said nothing. There was nothing to say. Across all 7 systems, the story repeated itself. Human fleets smashed through Council defenses with a speed and fury that broke every tactical model the aliens had ever built. In the Cathara system, a human destroyer, with its engines failing, rammed itself directly into a Council carrier, destroying both ships. The crew had time to evacuate. They chose not to. In the Volar sector, a group of human fighters, outnumbered 10 to 1, held a supply corridor for 4 hours until reinforcements arrived. Every single pilot survived, though their ships were barely holding together by the end. The Council had never faced anything like this. On Valtheris Prime, Grand Arbiter Volnus watched the battle reports pour in on a giant screen in the war room. Every report was worse than the last. System after system flashing red. Ships lost by the hundreds. Citadel Voron had fallen in less than 3 hours. A fortress that was supposed to hold for months. Volnus could not understand it. The Council's fleet was the largest in the galaxy. They had been the dominant military power for 10,000 years, and they were being torn apart by a species that had only been in space for 80 years. A transmission was intercepted, a panicked message from a Council fleet commander in the Cathara system. Noan G, who had been listening to Council communications since the war began, routed it to the Baco's bridge speakers so the crew could hear. The commander's voice was high and breaking. They will not stop. We have destroyed dozens of their ships, and they keep coming. They do not retreat. They do not negotiate. They fly into our fire, and they keep fighting. What are these things? Do-hyun listened to the transmission with his hands folded in his lap. When it ended, he turned to Somi, who was standing beside him with the faintest trace of grim satisfaction on her face. They still do not understand, Do-hyun said quietly. They think being from one world made us weak. They think because we only have 2 arms, and no claws, and no scales, we are fragile. He paused. We spent 10,000 years fighting each other for a single small planet. Every war, every famine, every disaster made us harder. We are the species that survived itself. They never stood a chance. Somi looked at the tactical display. Every objective was either taken or about to fall. Operation Dangun was succeeding beyond even her projections. Orders, Captain, she asked. Do-hyun's eyes were steady and cold. We do not stop. Not until every ship they use to burn our colonies is scrap metal. Not until every officer who gave those orders is in chains. We go forward. The Baco turned toward the next target, and the fleet followed. Behind them, the wreckage of the Council's military pride drifted in the dark, burning quietly among the stars. Captain Han Do-hyun made only one broadcast to the galaxy after Operation Dangun. He recorded it on the bridge of the Baco, standing straight, his uniform clean, his face calm. There was no anger in his voice. There was nothing in his voice at all, and that emptiness carried more weight than any scream ever could. You shed our blood, he said. You burned our homes. You killed our children. There will be no negotiation. There will be no mercy. There will only be consequences. The message was transmitted on every open frequency in every known language. It reached every station, every planet, every ship in the galaxy. And when it finished, the galaxy understood something that changed everything. Humanity was not fighting to defend itself. Humanity was not fighting to make a point. Humanity was fighting to end the Council as a power, completely and permanently, and nothing in the universe was going to stop them. The reaction was immediate. Neutral species began pulling their ships and citizens out of Council-controlled systems. 3 minor species that had been forced into the Council through threats quietly sent messages to human command, offering intelligence and safe passage through their territories. The great alliance that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years was cracking from the inside. Warlord Dragon watched it all fall apart and refused to accept it. He was old. He was proud. His species had been the military backbone of the Council since before humans had learned to use fire. He had personally crushed 4 rebellions and burned 2 species into extinction. He did not believe, could not believe, that a race of soft-skinned, short-lived creatures from a single blue planet could defeat him. He gathered every warship the Council had left, pulling them from defense stations, border patrols, and garrison fleets across the Empire. 2,300 ships answered his call. It was the largest fleet ever assembled under one command in the history of the galaxy. He positioned them in the Morath Nebula, a dense cloud of gas and radiation that sat directly in the path between human-controlled territory and the Council homeworld. The nebula was a natural fortress. Sensors could not see through it. Faster-than-light travel inside it was extremely dangerous. Any fleet entering the nebula would be blind, slow, and vulnerable. Dragon set his trap and waited. Yoon Somi saw it coming. She sat in the Bakehoe's planning room, staring at the star map with narrow eyes. The nebula was too obvious. Every sensor sweep showed the massive concentration of Council ships waiting inside. Dragon wanted the humans to fly in and fight on his terms, surrounded by gas clouds that would neutralize their speed advantage. "He is inviting us into a cage," Somi said to Do-hyun. "Then we do not walk through the door," Do-hyun replied. Somi laid out her counterplan. She called it Ghost Tiger. The idea was dangerously simple. A diversionary fleet of 200 human ships would approach the nebula from the front, making all the noise and showing all the aggression Dragon expected. They would engage the outer edge of his formation and draw his attention forward. Meanwhile, the real strike force, 400 ships led by the Bakehoe, would execute a micro-jump through a region of unstable space on the far side of the nebula, bypassing it entirely and emerging directly behind Dragon's fleet. The problem was that micro-jumping through unstable space was considered suicidal by every known species in the galaxy. The gravitational currents could tear a ship apart mid-transit. The margin for error was measured in fractions of seconds. Kang Ji-hyuk studied the calculations for a full day before he looked up from his console and said, "I can recalibrate the drives to survive the transit. But we will lose ships. Maybe 10%. Do-hyun looked at him. "Can it be done?" "Yes, then we do it." The Battle of Morath Nebula began with the diversionary fleet charging straight at the mouth of the cloud, weapons blazing. Dragon saw exactly what he expected. Brave, stupid humans flying into his trap. He ordered his fleet forward to crush them. For 20 minutes, the Council fleet pushed the human diversionary force back. Ships burned on both sides. Dragon stood on his command bridge with his claws gripping the railing, his yellow eyes bright with the fire of combat. For the first time since the war began, he felt like he was winning. Then the sensors officer screamed. "Contacts! Behind us! 400+ signatures emerging from unstable space on our rear flank. They are already at combat range." Dragon spun around. On the tactical display, a wall of blue markers appeared behind his fleet like ghosts stepping out of the dark. The human strike force had made the impossible jump. 18 ships had been lost in transit, torn apart by the gravitational forces. 382 had made it through, and they arrived with their weapons already firing. The Council fleet was caught between two forces, and everything fell apart. Dragon's ships tried to turn, but turning a fleet of 2,000 ships in a dense nebula was like trying to turn a river. Human ships poured fire into their exposed rear sections, targeting engines, shield generators, and command bridges with terrifying accuracy. No Unji, who had been inside the Council's communications network for months, fed live tactical data to every human ship. The humans knew where every Council vessel was, what its shield strength was, and where its weak points were. The Council was fighting blind, against an enemy that could see everything. Bae Sun-woo launched boarding operations against 3 Council capital ships simultaneously. His Marines cut through airlocks and fought through corridors filled with smoke and the screams of alien soldiers who had never faced close-quarters combat against humans. Sun-woo himself led the assault on a heavy cruiser, fighting his way to the engine room and planting charges that blew the ship's power core. He and his squad evacuated with less than a minute to spare, riding the shockwave back to their shuttle in a move that should have killed all of them. None of them died. Sun-woo's only comment was, "That was close." The battle raged for 6 hours. It was the largest and most violent space engagement the galaxy had ever seen. At its peak, over 3,000 ships were firing at each other in a cloud of gas that glowed red and white with the light of continuous explosions. Human ships that lost their weapons rammed into enemy formations. Crews that lost life support sealed their helmets and kept fighting in the vacuum. A single human corvette, its captain dead and its bridge destroyed, was steered into a council carrier by the ship's engineer using manual thruster controls from the engine room. The carrier broke in half. Dragon fought to the end. He stood on his bridge as the Baiko closed to point-blank range, refusing to retreat, refusing to surrender. He was a warrior. He would die like one. Do-hyun gave the order without hesitation. The Baiko fired a full broadside of hybrid railgun rounds directly into the bridge of Dragon's flagship. The tungsten slugs punched through the weakened shields and tore the entire forward section of the ship apart. Dragon, the warlord of the Galactic Council, died standing on his feet, staring at the human ship that killed him. When it was over, the nebula was a graveyard. Over 1,400 Council warships were destroyed or crippled. 212 human ships were lost. The Council's military spine was not just broken, it was dust. On Valtheris Prime, Grand Arbiter Volnus received the report. Dragon was dead. The fleet was gone. There was nothing left between the human armada and the Council homeworld. His hands, all 6 of them, trembled as he held the datapad. He turned to Emissary Talith, who stood in the doorway of the war room, watching him with an expression that held no sympathy and no surprise. "What do I do?" Volnus asked, and his voice was the voice of a very old creature who had just realized that everything he had built was ending. Talith looked at him for a long time. Then she spoke, and her words were carved from ice. "You should have listened when I told you what they are. They are not a species that forgives. They are a species that remembers. Every name, every face, every child. They remember all of it. And now they are coming, and there is nothing in this galaxy that will save you from what you have earned." Outside the window, the stars were quiet. But somewhere out there, getting closer with every passing second, 400 human warships were burning through the dark. And at their head, the Baiko flew like a blade aimed at the heart of an empire. Valtheris Prime had never known war. For over 10,000 years, the Council's homeworld had existed in perfect safety, protected by fleets so large that no species had ever dared to even dream of attacking it. Its cities were ancient and beautiful, built from white stone and living crystal that caught the light of their twin suns. Its people had never heard the sound of an explosion. Its children had never been taught what an air raid siren meant. They learned on a Tuesday. 400 human warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in high orbit above the planet, and their arrival blotted out the stars. From the surface, the people of Valtheris Prime looked up and saw the sky fill with dark shapes, each one burning with the blue glow of human engines. Some of them screamed, some of them ran, most of them simply stood and stared, because they had no frame of reference for what they were seeing. War had always been something that happened to other species, far away, in parts of the galaxy that did not matter. Now, it was here. The remaining Council defense forces scrambled to mount an orbital defense. A few hundred ships, mostly old patrol vessels and ceremonial guard frigates, formed a thin line between the human fleet and the planet. They fired their weapons, and their shots splashed harmlessly against human shields. The human fleet did not even slow down. They flew through the defense line like a river flowing around stones, disabling the Council ships with precise, targeted shots that destroyed engines and weapons, but left the crews alive. Do-hyun had given a very specific order. No unnecessary killing. Not today. Grand Arbiter Volnus, watching from the Council's central command tower, made one last attempt to stop what was coming. He opened a communication channel to the human fleet and spoke with a voice that tried very hard to sound dignified, but could not hide the trembling underneath. Humans, I am prepared to offer full reparations, territory, resources, whatever you want. Name your terms, and we will meet them. There is no need for further bloodshed. The channel remained open. No one answered. Instead, Nowunji began a broadcast. It went out on every frequency, in every known galactic language, to every receiver on the planet, and every ship in the system. It was not a speech. It was not a threat. It was a list. The complete registry of every human civilian killed in the colony attacks. Every single name. It started with the first victim from New Busan, a dock worker named Cho Minha, age 34. It continued with a retired grandmother named Shin Boyoung, age 71, who had moved to the colony to be closer to her grandchildren. It listed a newborn baby, just 11 days old, whose parents had not yet finished choosing a name. It listed Park Yuna, age 28, schoolteacher, New Gyeongju, and the 32 children in her classroom. Every name was read with the same calm, steady voice. Every age, every occupation. The list took 11 hours to transmit in full. The galaxy listened. On space stations, in ships, on planets across 1,000 systems, beings of every species stopped what they were doing and listened. Many of them had supported the Council's decision to strike the human colonies. Some had even celebrated it. None of them were celebrating now. 2.3 million names is not a number. It is a weight, and by the time the last name was read, that weight had settled on the conscience of the entire galaxy. When the list was finished, Do-hyun finally spoke. One sentence. We are coming down. Bae Sun-woo led the ground assault. 12,000 human marines descended on the capital city in dropships that screamed through the atmosphere like falling stars. They landed in the central district, barely a kilometer from the council's command tower. And they moved through the streets with the discipline of soldiers who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The ground battle was short. Council security forces, trained for crowd control and political intimidation, found themselves facing human marines who had been bred by 1,000 generations of ground warfare. The aliens were bigger and had better equipment. It did not matter. The humans moved in coordinated teams, clearing buildings and streets with a speed and efficiency that left the defenders no time to organize. Yoonji guided them from orbit, feeding real-time data on enemy positions, shutting down defense systems remotely, and opening doors that were supposed to be sealed forever. Sun-woo's squad pushed straight for the command tower. They breached the outer gates with explosives and fought their way up through 40 floors of resistance. Sun-woo was hit twice, once in the leg and once across the ribs. He kept climbing. His squad kept climbing. They did not stop until they reached the top. Grand Arbiter Valdis was in the throne room when the doors blew inward. It was a massive chamber, built to intimidate, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow, and walls lined with the banners of every species the Council had ever conquered. Valnis stood behind his ancient desk, surrounded by guards who dropped their weapons the moment they saw the humans step through the smoke. Sun-woo walked forward, limping, bleeding, his armor cracked and scorched. He stopped in front of Valnis and looked up at the towering insectoid who had ordered the death of 2.3 million people with a wave of his hand. Valnis flinched. He actually stepped back from the small, wounded human standing before him. In 300 years of rule, nothing had ever made him flinch. Sun-woo did not raise his weapon. He did not strike the Arbiter. He simply looked at him with eyes that held no rage, only a deep and terrible certainty. You are going to stand trial, Sun-woo said, and the whole galaxy is going to watch. The Galactic Tribunal was held on Orionis 7, the same trade station where the original diplomatic summit had taken place. the same station where Volnus had secretly voted to destroy human colonies, while human diplomats smiled and shook hands down the hall. The irony was not lost on anyone. Volnus, Admiral Serac, and 14 other council leaders were brought before a court made up of representatives from 30 species. The charges were crimes against sentient life, the deliberate and unprovoked massacre of civilian populations. The evidence was overwhelming. Communication records, military orders, targeting data showing that the strikes had deliberately avoided military installations and focused on population centers, schools, and hospitals. Emissary Talith testified against the council. She stood before the court and told them everything. She told them about Resolution 7 Omega. She told them about Volnus's arrogance and Dragon's laughter. She told them about her warnings and how every single one had been ignored. When she was finished, the court was silent. Captain Han Do-hyun gave the closing statement. He stood at the podium in his dress uniform, his hands at his sides, and spoke in the same quiet voice he had used on the bridge of the Baekho the night New Gyeongju burned. He talked about the farming colony. He talked about the fields of grain that stretched to the horizon under an alien sun. He talked about the children who were playing outside when the sky caught fire. He talked about a school teacher named Park Yuna, who held her students and whispered that everything would be okay, even though she knew it would not be. Then he looked directly at Volnus, who sat in chains behind a glass barrier, and said, "You thought shedding our blood would make us kneel. You were wrong. Every drop of blood you spilled became fuel. Every life you took became a reason. You did not contain us. You unleashed us. And this galaxy will never forget what happens when you give humanity a reason to fight." Volnus was convicted. Serac was convicted. They would spend the rest of their lives in a prison built on the ruins of New Gyeongju, surrounded by the names of the people they had murdered, carved into every wall. 5 years passed. Humanity did not build an empire. They had never wanted one. The old council was dissolved and replaced by a new galactic assembly where every species, no matter how small or young, had an equal voice. Humanity served as a founding member, not as a ruler. The frontier colonies were rebuilt. Memorials stood on each of the destroyed worlds. Simple white stones arranged in circles, one for every life lost. The galaxy was more peaceful than it had been in 10,000 years. Not because the other species had suddenly discovered kindness, but because they had learned, through fire and blood and defeat, what happened when you mistook human patience for weakness. On a bright afternoon on Orionis 7, Emissary Talith stood in front of a classroom of young alien diplomats. She was older now. Her silver skin had faded to pale gray. But her eyes were still sharp, and her voice still carried the weight of everything she had seen. A student raised a hand. "Emissary, what is the most important lesson of the Human Council War?" Talith was quiet for a long time. She looked out the window at the stars, and somewhere out there she knew human ships were still patrolling, still watching, still ready. "Never mistake kindness for weakness," she said softly. "Humans came to us with open hands. We answered with fire. And we learned, too late, that the hand that offers peace is the same hand that can crush worlds. They gave us every chance to be better. We chose doom." The students were silent. Talith smiled sadly and dismissed the class. Far away, on the edge of human space, the Baekho drifted through the dark between the stars. On the bridge, Captain Han Do-hyun sat in his chair, staring at the endless black. Yoon So-mi stood beside him, as she always did, her arms crossed, her eyes watching the same stars. "It is quiet," So-mi said. Do-hyun nodded slowly. "Yes, it is. And for humanity, that was enough. The galaxy was quiet. Their people were safe. The dead were remembered, and if anyone, anywhere, ever forgot the lesson of what happened when you shed human blood, the Baco, and 1,000 ships like it, would be there to remind them. The stars burned on in silence, and humanity kept watch.